Hello everyone and welcome to our In Focus BU webinar, Professional Boundaries and Difficult Conversations. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Debbie and I'm a State Manager with BU, and joining us today are three panellists. We have Chris Zollo and Trish Osgood, both BU consultants, and Maria Curtis is also with us, our BU Content Advisor. BU is a national initiative led by Beyond Blue in partnership with Early Childhood Australia and Headspace and funded by the Australian Government. BU aims to transform Australia's approach to supporting children and young people's mental health in early learning services and schools. Our vision is that every learning community is positive, inclusive and resilient, a place where every child, young person, educator and family can achieve their best possible mental health. BU is a collaborative learning community for educators who are supporting mental health and wellbeing of children and young people. Being part of this community means your early learning service or school has access to BU consultants, just like Chris and Trish, to assist you in understanding your learnings and actions. Is your school or service registered and participating with BU yet? If you aren't, you can register yourself and your early learning service today. There'll be links on the side of the screen for you throughout the session today. By participating today in our online learning community, we also hope you will learn and be inspired by the ongoing process of embracing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander pedagogy, the ways of being, knowing and doing, to focus on mental health as well. So I'm now going to pass to Chris to start us off today with an acknowledgement of country. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Deb. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians from all the lands on which we're meeting today, and also acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and all those who continue to hold the memories, traditions and ways of being for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We also recognise the importance of the continued connection to culture, country and community to the health, social and emotional wellbeing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. Throughout today's webinar, I'd invite you to consider how the ways that we can support educator and family wellbeing are informed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. Trish is now going to share a self-care message with us. Thanks, Trish.
Thanks so much, Chris. So you'll see that we've got a slide here that's about being safe and inclusive. So we're all here today to consider, learn and reflect about early childhood wellbeing and education. So on our screen, this is our BU ways for today. Remember to look after yourself. It's very important. A sense of safety is the most foundational requirement for positive mental health, and a sense of security and forming relationships. So helplines will be posted in the chat throughout this webinar. So please use them to talk to someone if you or somebody that you are with is experiencing difficult feelings. So that means that people are safe to be who they are able to work to their strengths, express their opinions and beliefs, and to feel heard and respected even when they have opposing views. We know that children learn from what adults around them do, and being aware of how to look after ourselves and support each other can make a huge difference to each of us, to the wellbeing of our team and to the children in our care. Children build a picture of who they are by observing adults and modelling what they do. So during the webinar today, there will be an opportunity for you to reflect on your own practices through polls and some reflective questions. Please remember to take care of yourselves when we talk about mental health today. And sometimes just be aware that unexpected feelings can emerge, even difficult ones. So please be aware of feelings that come up and make sure that you talk to somebody if you have them and they occur. So Maria's just going to talk about the online space now.
Welcome everybody. I just want to go through some technical tips to maximise your learning today. For any of you who are unfamiliar with this webinar platform, what you see, your screen will typically look like with the webinar viewer on the left and the control panel on the right. Throughout the webinar, you can ask questions about using the webinar function and we'll have some technical support available. The control panel with the question box is highlighted in blue. The responses in green are public responses and the ones in red private responses. You can also use your control panel to manage your phone or computer audio. Today, everyone is being placed in listen-only mode and your microphones have been muted as we've got a very large number of attendees. So if at any time you're experiencing difficulties, please note the customer care details that are on the screen and contact the team directly. So throughout the webinar, we encourage you to get as involved as much as you feel comfortable. It's important that everyone feels this is a safe place to learn and everyone's contributions matter. You can ask any questions via the questions box, and we hope to respond to as many of your queries as possible during today's session. But for those that we don't, for any that we don't get to, we'll follow up after the event concludes. So I'd just like to acknowledge our wonderful support team in the background. We have Dino, Steph, Di, Rita, and Juanita. Now, while there'll be links to resources or references will be posted in the chat, you can copy them, but there's also a downloadable handout also with the reflective questions on it that you might like to use. So these will also be available post-webinar, but feel free to download that at any time. Now, we'll be inviting you to participate in the polls that we'll be launching throughout the session, and all event participants will be able to access a certificate of participation and a recording of this webinar. Now, we're also making the attendee list public for you now. So please make use of those functions. And Deb, you might like to go over what we're going to focus on today as we move to more interesting material.
Thanks, Maria, Chris and Trish, for setting us up today. So today the webinar will focus on our professional roles and our boundaries as educators. We'll consider ways we can prepare and conduct difficult conversations and how we can also include self-care to support ourselves when we're involved in challenging situations like that. Within our workplaces, it's important to take time to step back and reflect around why professional boundaries are important with our families and with our colleagues. They can be especially relevant within the context of having a difficult conversation, and often we reflect on that with regards to families, but difficult conversations can happen with colleagues or a manager or a supervisor as well. We'll hope you'll end this session with some strategies and perhaps also some reflections you can take back to your own workplace to further discuss and trial ways that fit in within the context of your own learning community. So let's begin with considering professional boundaries and our role as educators. So when discussing this area, we can sometimes define our boundaries by what we do as well as what we don't do. We are not specialists such as a counsellor or a diagnostician, and it's important to define that for ourselves and for those we work with within our early learning services. As we're discussing our boundaries and roles first up today, a poll will come up on the screen so you can reflect on your own experiences as well. This is your first chance to be a bit interactive, I guess, within our webinar today. So our poll question is, how do you find maintaining professional boundaries? Is it something that you find really easy all the time? Can it be difficult sometimes or always? Is it challenging for you? Perhaps this might be different to when you first started your career to where you might be now within your professional role. Chris, if you wanted to start us off a bit today by, while people are responding to that poll, by discussing and reflecting on how the Code of Ethics can assist educators when they're considering professional boundaries.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. The Code of Ethics is based on fundamental shared values of the profession, and it's actually intended to guide ethical decision making that supports a commitment to maintaining the rights and dignity of children and families and colleagues. The Code makes reference to several core principles, and those core principles are organised around how educators will respond in relation to
You right there, Chris? Sorry, Christy still just had a bit of a cough there.
Chris. Chris, I think
Sorry,
you're
Chris, we
muted.
just seem to not be able to hear yourself at the moment. Can you just double check if you're muted or not for us, please?
Sorry, my apologies, I was muted. I'm going to
Okay.
go back to where we were. I was talking about the code and how it makes reference to different core principles to guide us in making considering ethical issues, particularly in relation to competing priorities around maintaining professional boundaries. The core principles are kind of organised around children, families and colleagues, the profession and communities. It's worth considering these core principles. Some of these core principles, we'll reflect on a couple now, but as I do that, it's worth considering how they're pertinent to maintaining professional boundaries and informing service policies on maintaining professional boundaries as well. So the first core principle I'd like to point out is the one that in relation to children, which is act in the best interests of children. That's particularly pertinent to think about when you are thinking about any competing priorities around professional boundaries. That in fact might be a really lovely guiding principle always when trying to determine professional boundaries. Is this in the best interests of children? So I'm just going to pick up on another one that relates to families, respecting families' right to privacy and maintaining confidentiality. That's particularly pertinent to having difficult conversations with families as well. But if we think about the right to privacy and maintaining confidentiality for families, we can also see that that's linked to acting in the best interests of children as well. The last one I just want to refer to relates to the profession itself. So within the scope of the professional roles, the particular core principles suggest that we need to avoid misrepresentation of our professional competence and qualifications. This has direct links to maintaining professional boundaries around something that Deb has already raised around, you know, what our role is. Are we counsellors and are we diagnosticians? Are we acting in that way, and should we be acting in that way? So you can see that the code could support services to review policies and procedures that they have in place in reference to professional boundaries and support that commitment that we have to maintaining the rights, dignity of children, families and colleagues and communities. Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, Chris. And I think that's a really good reminder about how the Code of Ethics can be used in a really practical way to support us to reflect on our boundaries and our roles. Within the BU content, there is also some areas where it can help us reflect on our professional boundaries. Within the Assist module, it actually talks about, this is a quote from the actual Assist module, it talks about our role is to observe and support children and young people. We're not expected to be a mental health expert or counsellor. We shouldn't seek to diagnose or to solve mental health issues and conditions, but rather approach the work in a way that supports positive mental health in all children and young people. Trying to understand your role within the bigger picture, which also includes the family, the learning community, health professionals who can provide support when needed. And keeping in mind that there are boundaries around our role as educator and our interactions with families when providing support. If a family comes to us with concerns about their child or young person, thinking about whether are we the best person to discuss the issue? Do they need more specialised support, or perhaps a specialised colleague within our team, a member of the leadership team, or perhaps someone external to our service to provide that support? And how can we assist them with making decisions about possible referral options? So we'll just see how we went with our poll today. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to respond. So we can see that, you know, sometimes difficult is definitely the most popular one there at 72%. But, you know, maintaining those professional boundaries is something that we have to work on, and is something that can come up, you know, in a way for our work that we need to consider on a regular basis. So thanks for sharing your thoughts there. So we're just going to now consider some ways, some examples, I guess, around professional boundaries and why they're important. And Maria, you've got a really great example from your own personal experience around professional boundaries within a community that you were living in. Are you happy to share that with us?
Yes. Look, it was in a small town, but it could also have occurred within a small community within a larger setting. I was working in an early learning service and I went to my GP. Now, in these towns, the boundaries are blurred. You see the people socially, you see them in the workplace, but I went to my GP for a personal matter and found that I was being asked about a concern that the doctor had about their child. Now, I was a bit taken aback initially by the professional boundary being crossed by the doctor, and as well, how do I respond? So I actually said that it was better to have a time and a place and make a time to come and talk about it. But I just was quite confronted by that crossover of boundaries, and I know the boundaries are very blurred in small communities because you see people socially in the workplace and professionally, and so that was my example that I was a lot early in my profession and it was quite a confronting situation. So yes.
I can imagine so, and especially seeing you would have been not in work mode, obviously, because you were at that GP appointment. So it's a bit of a tricky space to be in.
It was. It's totally taken, off balance. Yes.
And Chris, you've got another example that you wanted to share with us, which takes us into that space of social media.
Yeah, it's not so much of an example, Deb, but it's more of a bit of a reflection about, in our current societal context, the importance of considering professional boundaries as they relate to social media, given its prevalence. So it's probably a good time to think about what your service policies and procedures have to say about social media use and maintaining professional boundaries, and actually why we have those policies in place and why it's important to maintain those professional boundaries in the social media context. There's some really interesting ethical dilemmas that arise relating to social media use for educators in early learning services. Questions like, what would you do if a parent sent a friend request to you on social media? What's the response there? How would you act? How would you maintain a professional boundary? Other considerations include the potential issues that can arise if you do cross a boundary of this kind or a professional boundary. How would this fit then with the Code of Ethics core principles, such as acting in the best interests of children or respecting the privacy and maintaining confidentiality for families? These are really important ethical dilemmas to consider, and I suspect it depends on the context, the relationships that we have with different groups of people. I think the Code of Ethics provides some very clear guidance in relation to online interactions with colleagues, at least. It states that in relation to colleagues, I'll maintain an ethical relationship in online interactions, and possibly the ethical relationship in online interactions needs to be unpacked as well. Thanks, Deb.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris. From my own experience, I've previously worked as a director in an early learning service, and I've had situations where staff members have chosen to leave a workplace, but also situations where a staff member has been asked to leave. So in these situations, there are bound to be questions from families and among staff as well. So it was really important as a manager to consider professional boundaries in those cases, where I had both personal and professional information about staff members. In this particular experience I had, it was important to ensure confidentiality was kept and also to ensure support was provided to those involved. It was also really a good opportunity to model professional boundaries to the broader team, highlighting the importance to not speculate about the situation. And I was also able to give guidance on the kind of language which could be used to discuss the matter professionally with families. I was going to say if questions arise, but it's more like when questions arise, because we knew that they would. We also really kept the children's needs in focus, and I think that also reflects back on what Chris has said about using the Code of Ethics in that way too, and that we had to consider their needs during the transitions periods with new staff coming in. As a manager, it was also important to consider my own self-care and consider who I had around me who could be a support to debrief, which was really valuable and necessary, but also in a way that I could do it where I was considering the confidentiality of the matter. So building on from this discussion around professional boundaries, we're now going to step into that space where we're going to explore a bit more around difficult conversations. So our second poll is going to come up now, where we're going to really consider, and if you're happy to share, your experience as an educator of difficult conversations with colleagues or families. So sometimes we automatically go to a negative space when we think about difficult conversations, but sometimes we can have an experience that can be really positive and rewarding around having a difficult conversation, but they can also be quite challenging. So if you can have a think about your own experience and then respond to the poll. And while you're thinking about that, Trish, perhaps you can start us off by having a bit of a conversation and a reflection around why we find some conversations difficult.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. It's a great question, an extremely valid one. We do sometimes deem conversations difficult when we're not able to predict the emotional responses from families or colleagues. Sometimes it's a sense of also not feeling prepared emotionally and or even mentally ourselves for the potential pathways that this conversation may take, and not necessarily being in control of those responses. It is helpful to be prepared as much as we can, ensuring that we are considering aspects that may impact the response, such as timing, environment, our own feelings, the other person's background, distractions, and ensuring we give space to the other person to share and be validated instead of dismissing their point of view. As Maria mentioned earlier, even just booking in that time and giving yourself that mental and emotional space to be prepared as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, Trish. I think that's a really good point, considering about how sometimes what makes us feel uncomfortable is that we're not quite sure what the response is going to be. So I think it's really good to acknowledge that. Chris, did you have any other thoughts around why we deem some conversations as difficult?
Oh, clearly, the unpredictability of the situation, as Trish has said, brings us a lot of discomfort. I think we all like to be prepared. I think not knowing what the reaction might be is difficult as well. Although I think we could probably imagine what the reaction's going to be through empathising. And I think we need to have some confidence in our professional capacity to remain calm, to validate the emotions being experienced by the other person we're talking to. That's often really important, and that is really quite supportive of the person who's experiencing those emotions as well. I think we also should be able to just sit with that emotion for a while as it's being expressed, perhaps just the way we do that with children. And I think if we do that, we can probably manage the discomfort a little bit better than we seem to be thinking we would manage it right now. Thanks, Deb.
Thanks. So let's have a look at our poll responses and see how other people felt about that. So yeah, just under half found that having difficult conversations can be challenging, but it's really positive to see that there's also 17% that it can be rewarding. And that can be a really great thing to reflect on when you have had those rewarding, positive conversations. It can help put you in a positive mind space for the next one that might come, because we know that these are things that pop up regularly within our workplace and as our role as educators. So how can we best prepare ourselves then for difficult conversations? And it might be with a family member that we're working with, might be with a colleague, or perhaps even with a manager or supervisor. What sort of strategies can we put in place to really provide us with some confidence in these spaces? Trish, would you like to share an anecdote that you have from your own experience around preparing for a difficult conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Deb. I recently had a service contact me with a particular concern about how best to support a particular child. They were really concerned about this child because they'd experienced some trauma through the death of a parent. And they were displaying signs of needing extra support, both in their setting and externally. The educators were finding it difficult to have conversations with the other parent, as it was still a really sensitive area and a trigger for that parent. So we discussed reading the information in the Inquire module from the early support domain as a way of preparing and equipping the educators to frame the conversations in a sensitive way. And, you know, just having that information and those strategies ready helped them. So, you know, and the reason I recommended that one was for the, you know, the very reason that when I completed the module myself and did that online learning, I was able to reflect on my own history working with children and families and found that the strategies were extremely practical and applicable, and, you know, definitely valid communication strategies that really enhanced my communication processes. So, you know, in communication in this situation was definitely the key to getting support both for the parent and the child that they needed desperately.
Thanks, Trish. And it sounds like you're really able to support that service too, to really consider what their role was and their professional boundaries and roles in supporting that family, and helping them to communicate in a way that, you know, met their needs, but also was ensuring it stayed within their boundaries and roles. Maria, you've got another strategy that you found really useful too.
Yes, and I'm glad we've got the time to talk about it at the moment. It's the Stop, Reflect and Act framework, and the link to that will be put in the chat. It's probably just a really useful framework to use when you get questions, those unexpected questions, you know, in a morning when parents are dropping off their children and you're in the passageway and there are other people, and all of a sudden a parent comes up to you and asks you something, they have a concern or they're asking a question, and you have to stop. That's not the appropriate place or time to respond to that. And it's about not reacting to the situation, about pausing and listening. It's not saying, well, look, go away and come back another time. It's about making a time, stopping and listening, and then reflecting on it later as to what is the best way to respond to this parent, because you might need to confer with colleagues, other team members, as to get a broader picture. And then after consultation with, or giving it some considerable thought, then you can act and make a time, an appropriate place to have that conversation. This also relates to colleagues in your team. If one of them comes to you and says, you know, I'm really upset about something, again, instead of reacting, it's about listening and then reflecting on it and saying, well, look, we'll get back to you and we'll have a chat about that later. It's that Stop, Reflect, Act framework that I think is an incredibly useful framework in a variety of situations. And I know I've used it many times in many different situations.
Thanks for sharing that, Maria. And I think it's, you know, just thinking about that myself, often it's the stop part that's the most challenging part, because when someone comes to you with something, often our first, we can sometimes have an emotional reaction, or our first response is that we really want to help. So even though we might not have all the information, or maybe it's not even the appropriate space to have that conversation, we want to help and provide support. So sometimes that stopping, pausing and listening is the most challenging part. Have you found that before in your experience?
Yes, because you often have an emotional reaction. Why are they asking me this? Why am I getting this question now? And it's an initial emotional reaction that you get. So it's just that stopping and pausing and actually listening. Sometimes your emotional reaction stops you from listening, and you have to reflect on what they actually said, and maybe unpack that a little bit. So yeah. Thanks.
And Trish, we talked earlier about the Make Safe symbol. We started off for today. Have you got some more information around that and how that can support us in preparing for difficult conversations?
Yes, definitely. So we did speak about Make Safe, and essentially it's not only making the other people safe that we're speaking with, but also ourselves. So, you know, acknowledging that difficult conversations can be quite emotional, and you know, it's really important to start with that concept of Make Safe, and it could include ensuring that the space is private and confidential. You know, that confidentiality is maintained. You know, establishing what we want to support, or how we want to support that family or child, or that we that we're there to help. Starting the conversation with a question and gaining the family's perspective. So there is a lovely quote that's mentioned in the early support domain and in the inquire module, and it says, start the conversation by asking the family to tell you what their child is like at home. And it's a really good way to start with their perspective, and to make them feel safe, like they're being heard, and that their opinion matters. So I guess also the other aspect to that too is, giving yourself time as well to be prepared. So, sometimes it is about, not delaying that conversation necessarily for the sake of it, but, being able to be better prepared for those conversations. So booking in a time and a space that is, safe, but also coming prepared for those conversations. And it may include considering aspects of their culture, as mentioned before, family dynamics and language. However, it's also about having collected information. So we do have some really good tools on the website. So we've got the Mental Health Continuum and the Beatles Observation Tool. And they're great ways of collecting data and having observations that are there, where you can collect information on children and just have that ready as well.
And that can help with confidence as well, knowing that you've got some information there to share and support, and that also maybe the family might want to take away with them at the end. So that's a great suggestion. Maria, one of the other techniques that we often can hear about is what's known as the sandwich technique to help us have a difficult conversation. Can you expand on that one a little bit?
Yes, look, the sandwich technique's been used in a variety of situations, and it's basically just a sandwich. So you make some strength-based or positive comment, whether you're talking to a family member, or colleagues, or in a variety. I've used it in other situations. And then you might have a concern or a question, not necessarily a concern, but just a question about something that you want. And I guess by sandwiching the concern or question in the middle, you end up with you make another strength-based or positive comment, so that it's, if it is just a question, it doesn't appear as though you're really imposing or alarming the parents. It's just nicely put together with a strength-based and concern or question and another strength-based comment. Excellent to use with families, co-workers, management, in lots of situations, and I've seen it very well used, and it's a good technique. Yeah.
Thanks. And we've talked about the importance of listening and active listening as part of these difficult conversations. Trish, what's your thoughts around the role of active listening plays in preparing and being involved in a difficult conversation?
Yeah, look, as mentioned, listening is a really important part to make the other party feel heard and have their voice. And not only that, to just fully understand what it is that we're actually having a conversation about, and to get the full picture. Active listening is so much more than listening with our ears. It's also about body language, and there's quite a number of different strategies. So, when we do consider a solutions-based approach to having these conversations, active listening is actually part of that. So, active listening, we need to listen to the needs of the family and the child, maybe even a colleague, asking about the strategies that maybe they employ at home if it's a family, for example. So, active listening does have, it includes things such as attending, following the conversation, asking appropriate questions, the use of pauses and silences, reflecting back to clarify and prioritizing the main purpose of the conversation. So, if there is a distraction, that we're bringing it back. And, having our body language in a way that we are actually giving them, that attention as well. So you can actually find the active listening skills in something called the Communication Skills for Educators fact sheet. It's in the relationships topic on the BU website. So fact sheets and then relationships, and you'll find communication skills for educators. It is a great resource that I often refer to, and I often recommend people to have a look at it, because it really does outline those skills and make them really clear as well.
Mm. And as you said, they're really good skills to support our work with families, but just as importantly, we can use them when we're talking with colleagues or also with children. All of those communication skills are transferable across multiple settings. So they're really useful for us in our day-to-day work as educators in early learning services. I think one of the things we've been talking about is preparing for difficult. Always have an opportunity to prepare for difficult conversations. Sometimes they come in ways and means that are unexpected for us. What's your suggestions about how we can best support and look after ourselves and to manage those difficult conversations if they come a bit out of the blue? Oh, Chris, sorry, you're just on mute again.
Sorry, Deb.
That's okay.
As much as we can say that we're unprepared for conversations, as Maria said, somebody might approach you in the morning if you're in the service and you're not prepared to have that conversation at the time. I think the thing that makes us think that we're actually unprepared for the conversation is that we don't know what's coming. So we don't know what the topic's going to be, so we don't feel prepared in that sense. But everything we've just talked about, the stop, reflect, act is a way to buy yourself some time. So active listening and validating the importance of having the conversation, but postponing it to another time where we can maintain confidentiality and where we can create a safe space for everybody, where we can actually gather the information we need to actually respond. And I think that you'll find that even a colleague or even a family would respond positively to you validating their feelings, the importance of having the conversation, and also making a time which is more suitable for everybody. So we can actually have a conversation confidentially, safely and respectfully together. So as unprepared as we feel, the strategies we've talked today are actually about being prepared for that conversation. We just don't know what the topic of the conversation is, but there are lots of strategies that support us to be prepared, I think.
That's great, Chris. And I think that validation is really one of the really important keys in those moments. So really validating the information or the emotions that have been shared with us around what's happening for the family or for the colleague, and then providing them that reflection back, saying, we understand, we're hearing you, but can we talk about it at a different time, and making sure that there's that follow-up, so that builds that trust and that relationship, and that helps to support other conversations that might need to happen later on as well. It's that ongoing relationship that's really valuable and important, and all of those small steps, they really help to build that over time. And that's part of what helps us to build mentally healthy communities overall, that feeling of safety and that feeling of sense of belonging and relationships that people can grow and develop over time. So we've got time for another poll for us now, thinking about the educator's role in difficult conversations. So when we look at those conversations and reflect on some that we've had, or maybe you're already preparing or planning for one that you've got coming up in future, thinking about what is our role in that conversation. We've got 4 different options there, but we probably could have thought of 10 different options really. And sometimes what that might look like for you is different depending on the type of conversation. So have a little think about what you consider your role might be, and mark which one you think while we're talking about this topic a bit further. So Chris, when we're actually thinking about our role and having a difficult conversation now and considering our professional boundaries in our roles, sometimes the question we forget to ask ourselves is, who am I the most appropriate person to have this conversation?
Yeah, that's a really important question to ask, and I think there's lots of considerations that need to be made around who's the most appropriate person to have the conversation. That includes the nature of the issue, the need that needs to be raised, existing relationships between the people who are going to be involved in the conversation, cultural and language considerations as well. I do know a director of a service with a high number of Aboriginal children enrolled who always seeks the support of an educator who identifies as Aboriginal. The educator is always available to families at drop-off and pick-up time. so they can approach her if necessary. If it's a difficult conversation, they can find a way to take them elsewhere and then engage the director as well. So when those sensitive issues are raised, or when the director needs to raise a sensitive issue for discussion with families, what happens is that the educator approaches the family quietly first, and kind of gives them a bit of background about the discussion and the need for a discussion and meeting, and then she organises a meeting with the director. Generally, families are quite comfortable have the educator sit in on the meeting with her and the director together, and in that capacity, the educator actually provides support for both the family and the director. And the outcome of this approach has always been quite positive for this particular service. I do need to note, though, that it's a strategy that works for that unique community. So thinking about things like culture, language, existing relationships is really important, and the nature of the issue that's being raised and who should be raising it as well, before making a decision about who's actually going to lead that conversation.
Thanks for sharing that example, Chris. That's a really good one where the team is actually also working collaboratively together. So not one person feels like they have that sense of ownership or responsibility. And that's actually a really good protective factor for the team and for the educators as well, to feel that support around each other. And actually for the families to see that in action on a day-to-day basis as well would be really valuable, I would think, as well. So in that situation, just considering the poll that we just had up, what's the role do you think the educator is playing in that particular situation?
I think her primary role is as a facilitator, to work with making families feel safe and respected, creating that safe space and bridging that relationship between the director and the families as that relationship continues to build. And obviously she's providing support as well for the director and for the families. And again, I think that probably contributes to creating a safe space for everyone.
Thanks. And Maria, sometimes when we're having these difficult conversations, they can sometimes take an unexpected turn. Not everyone will follow a similar pattern. What do you think can happen, or what's some ways we can support ourselves if a conversation has an unexpected outcome?
Well, look, no matter how prepared you are, you don't know what's going to occur. You don't know how you think you may have a great relationship and working in partnership with the family. And I had the experience where I thought all of those things. I'd carefully prepared for the conversation. And then one of the parents got up and just stormed off and walked out of the meeting. And it was totally unexpected. And the other parent was left looking shocked. And it was just a difficult situation. So it was a matter of you just have to sort of do what you can in that situation. And I always plan when I'm managing these conversations to make sure that there's a proper finalisation to the conversation, because I think that's really important, and even more so in this situation, because the finalising the conversation, it's also about making sure that everyone's on the same page and summarising any actions or clarifying it. But when this unexpected event happened in this situation, I tried to continue the conversation with the remaining parent, but she was too distressed. So it was a matter of making another time the following day to actually be able to draw the points that we had already established together and look at where we could go from there. And it was important that before she left, we at least established that, because I really believe in an ideal world that wouldn't happen, because you carefully prepare your conversation and what's going to be the outcome. And finalising the conversation is very important.
Yeah, thinking about those next steps is a really important part of the process. So when you can't get to that step, it can be quite challenging. But I think it sounds like you're almost using some of those stop, reflect, act strategies
Yes.
in the moment.
Yes.
So it was about
Yeah.
sort of stopping and pausing and giving some time to the
Yes.
remaining parent and listening, and then, you know, reflecting on what was necessary at the moment, which wasn't necessarily to finish the conversation. It wasn't the right time. So the
No.
action was to set another time so
Yes.
that could happen when everyone was in a space where they were more comfortable and able to work through the matter and come to some conclusions.
Yes.
So yeah, it sounds like you're using some of those strategies in the
Yes.
moment.
But I think it is very important that there is a finalisation to all these conversations, because I've been in a situation where my idea of what we'd discussed and the other person's idea of what we'd discussed were miles apart, because sometimes you hear what you want to hear. So I think it's very important that there's some sort of summary to finalise any conversation that you have.
So yeah, so it's about clarifying and
Yes.
summarising as well, I guess.
Yes.
And that might look different for different people. So for some people, that's just the conversation itself. For some people, it might be that a follow-up email is really beneficial, or to go away with some written information so they can consider it further at a later point in time. So
Yes.
yeah, I think there's
Very
some
much.
really important things to consider. Yeah.
Very much
So
tailored to the situation.
yeah, we'll just have a quick look at the poll to see what people felt. So yeah, so a lot of people feel that it's all of those things at various points. But obviously a support and a facilitator are two of the really key elements about our role in those conversations. And I think it's really good when reflecting back on our professional boundaries to ensure when we move into those difficult conversations, we might want to clarify that initially with families as well, or with our colleagues, and highlight what our role is in that space, that we're not coming in to try and diagnose, or we're not coming in to provide professional expert support. We're not clinicians. So sometimes clarifying that can be really important at the beginning of that conversation, and framing it as we're here to support and assist with whatever ways we can. So we've got some strategies, hopefully, and some ideas around professional difficult conversations. But I think the other part of that is that our elements around self-care, because it can be a really professionally challenging situation to move through. So Trish, are you happy to unpack and share some ideas around educator wellbeing and self-care when people are in professionally challenging situations?
Yeah, look, thanks, Deb. Yeah, self-care is extremely important, not only for our own mental health, but for sustainability in our roles as well. Looking after yourself in general, and in particular after a difficult conversation, is about finding something that works for you. So, look, that could be a range of strategies. So, these can, include something that suits your personality type, and it suits your learning style and as well. So, things like booking in some time to exercise works for a lot of people. Unpacking what the conversation was about, or talking to a colleague about how you're feeling. Booking in some social time with a friend, particularly if you're an extrovert. That meditation is always quite good. Following up in terms of, setting practical next steps. I know that for some people, that's about putting it down on paper and making it visual and making it very practical. And, we've mentioned that about summarising conversations and maybe even having that takeaway information. So that could be agreed next steps that really give everybody involved that feeling of, they're solving something, they're moving forward to the next step, they're getting that support that they need. And it's not just the people you're talking to, it's yourself as well. And it's just giving you that sense of achievement. For some people, that's really important. I mean, it might be something like reading a book, or just having some alone time to reflect. But I know that in my past experience, sometimes I just even notify a colleague or somebody in leadership of an upcoming conversation that I thought may have been quite emotional or quite sensitive, having them check in afterwards, or just going and checking in with them afterwards about how I was feeling, was in itself, it was a really great self-care. Just to kind of express that was a really handy thing to do. And I know that professional boundaries are really extremely important to consider. And it's not only just in the context of those conversations, but in general when we're considering the balance between work and home life. burnout can be, a very real thing, and it can be the result of not finding that balance as well. So, when you consider that balance, it is important to keep in mind how you economize your time and your priorities at work when you're at work. That might be that, you might be a list writer. You could be dividing your to-do list into, sections of time. So things that are short things to do. So if you've only got 10 minutes, you can do this one little task and cross it off your list. Or if it's something longer, doing it at the end of your work day before you go home. It's just making sure that you're economizing that time and the resources that are available at your workplace and keeping work at work. It's also having that clear cutoff from work and your personal life, whether that be, not taking work home, both physically and mentally, finding a way to change your own headspace when you leave work. I know that a lot of people do that in different ways. And again, it's finding that something that really works for you. So, it can be done through establishing a routine, such as listening to music when you leave work, reflecting on the day through, writing a list for the following day. It could be something like listening to a podcast. It's just anything that works for you that helps you to mentally separate from, your time at work and your time at home. And it's about setting up those routines and transitions that work for you when you're also arriving at work. So it's not only leaving work, it's about arriving work and being prepared as well. And that can really flow through to a lot of different aspects for how you are mentally prepared for your day as well. And how your stress levels are for that day too. So I know one service that sets up in the mornings together. So they get there a little bit earlier. They set up together in their teams, and then after they finish setting up for the day, they actually set aside time to have a cup of tea or coffee together as their team building, self-care, and just establishing their mindset for the day. And I guess the other thing that we probably need to mention here too, Deb, is that we have a number of wellbeing tools for you, and you might have staff members who, they maybe not, don't have those routines set up yet. That's maybe something you want to work on in your setting. So our wellbeing tools for you, which is under our resources section in our tools and guides, there's some really great websites and tools in there. But the one thing I really wanted to highlight is we've got a number of different websites, links that actually have links to some self-care planning templates. And it might be something might be a need that you've identified in your setting that you'd like to undertake in a staff meeting or send out as just a helpful thing to help your educators. And it's about identifying, every educator identifying their own triggers that might be setting them off for the day or something that might not be working for them. It's about identifying their own supports that they do have in place and that they might put into place. And it's also about strategies that they can actually plan to put in place. That might be about arriving that 10 minutes earlier at work or 15 minutes earlier and having that time to mentally prepare for the day. It could be a number of things that actually work for them, but it's a really vital thing to do, is to take that time out to consider where we're at in that journey of self-care, and to really plan ahead and think about reflecting on what we have in place that's maybe working or not working. So, and what can we do about that too?
That's great. Thanks, Trish. And I really like the way you've approached that in regards to there's elements of personal responsibility when it comes to educator self-care, but there's also that broader team responsibility. So I like those two elements you've discussed there. So today we've covered quite a lot of content, and we've shared quite a lot of information around our professional boundaries and our roles as educators. Really looked at how we can prepare and support ourselves and each other when we're participating in difficult conversations, and the role self-care plays in supporting us when we're in a professionally challenging situation. So I'd just like each of our panellists to share a takeaway message that they would take away today. And I invite everybody who's listening today to do the same thing, whether you want to jot down a note, consider something that you will take back to your workplace, whether it's something for you individually or perhaps a reflective question or action for your team to take on board. But Maria, Trish and Chris, have any of you got any takeaways that you'd like to share with us today?
Yes.
Yeah, look, I've got one, Deb. Sorry. Mary, would you like to go first? That's fine.
No, you go.
Yeah, I just want to reflect on things that both Mary and Chris have mentioned about the difficult conversations that come upon us unexpectedly, and just creating the importance of creating a dedicated time that gives both the safe space and also the time for you to reflect, but validating. And I think all three of you have actually mentioned that. And I just really found that was a really valid point to take away, that, sometimes those conversations do come on us unexpectedly, and they're often quite emotional as well. So, that's a really important, is to find those strategies that work to be able to create the right environment to have those conversations as well.
Thanks, Trish. Maria?
Look, I just wanted to reiterate that my takeaway is using the Stop, Reflect, Act framework, because I've used it so frequently, and it's that moment of stopping, not emotionally reacting. And to me, that's a more professional approach that you have. Yeah.
And it's one of those things, the more you use it, the more familiar and second nature it will become.
It becomes
Thanks,
embedded
Maria.
in what you do. Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, have you got a takeaway you'd like to share with us today?
I think there's a couple of things. I think it's really important to think about existing policies and procedures and how they support us to maintain professional boundaries, and to have discussions about professional boundaries at the service. What do those, what do your policies and procedures mean in relation to professional boundaries, So raising those ethical dilemmas that might arise, supporting the discussion with use of the code and your own policies and procedures is really helpful. I think that's going to help people feel much more prepared to actually respond to any ethical dilemmas that arise in this area as well. I think it's probably an ongoing conversation and reflection that needs to happen, and that's one way to support everybody to be prepared to maintain professional boundaries, and also to have difficult conversations, whether they're planned or unplanned.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. I hope everyone today is also considering what takeaways they can have, and please take the time to jot them down, note them, so that they're actually, in a way that you can utilise them later on. So I'd really like to thank everyone for participating today. When you exit, you will be prompted to complete an exit survey. So we really encourage you to do so we can get feedback and better understand how our BU in Focus webinars are meeting the needs of people who are watching and listening today. When you complete it, please include the names of anyone who is watching with you as well. So that way it gives us some additional information. As many of you know, these webinars are a really great way to not only learn, but also reflect and put learning into action. And we know that that's such an important part of our continuous improvement and professional development in this space. And it's really also a way of showing our continued professional development within the BU framework as well. You can also utilise the remaining elements of our BU framework, which is obviously the professional learning, as well as a way to really reflect and act on your mental health goals within your service. You can contact our team at any point for assistance with that. The BU consultant is there to provide support at any time for you in a range of ways, either on a one-on-one, through national check-ins, through webinars like this, through a whole range of ways to can really support early learning services in schools when you're implementing BU. Remember, if you're not yet registered, information will have been coming up on the screen on how to register, and check it out, go on, it's a really easy step to do. So thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate your time today, and we hope you've got some really good takeaways from our session. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.